Good afternoon and welcome to our webinar, The Virtual Help Desk, Effective Outsourced IT Support. My name is Graham Fleming and I'm a Market Development Manager with Terakai Corporation. I'm pleased to introduce Jake Carroll, a 20-year industry veteran focused on providing business optimization solutions for IT organizations. Today, Jake will share some tips, tricks, and tools for integrating internal support teams and outsourced resources for the shortest response times, best use of skill sets, and greatest overall ROI. And without further delay, welcome Jake.
Thank you, Graham. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our presentation. I'm Jake Carroll, Vice President of Channel Sales for Outsourced Corporation. As Graham had mentioned, I've been in the IT industry for quite a while, and our main mission here at Autotask is to provide IT service providers and their customers with software solutions to better manage their IT service management and assets. So what we'll spend some time on today, as Graham had mentioned, was how do we best utilize the best of both worlds of the internal resources that you've invested in as an IT organization and potentially decide when and how to take advantage of external resources to optimize service delivery and drive business growth. So here's our goal for today, is to really spend some time helping you to determine what, if any, of your IT tasks can effectively be, I'll say, co-sourced instead of outsourced. And with the execution of that, how does it help optimize your management of those IT resources and also help you drive business growth? So making sure that the amount of resource and time that you spend managing your IT investments are really directed toward driving your company's core value proposition to grow your business. So some of the things that we can hope to take away today. First of all, getting an understanding of how blending the use of your internal teams with outsourced support to maximize your resource utilization and drive growth. Basically what we're going to drive at here is what's the absolute best way to take advantage of the resources that you currently have, their availability, their certifications, their skill sets, to drive your business growth. And where is it appropriate and optimal to take advantage of the skill sets, certifications, training, and support availability of an outside organization. The next thing that we'll spend some time doing is really how would you assess the right IT functions that you might want to offload from your internal staff to an external organization to maximize growth. And we'll spend a little bit of time on how you might want to go through the process of determining which ones are the best to co-source or outsource. The next thing, which is no small task, is understanding the key attributes around an ideal outsourced service provider partner. It's really important and critical that when selecting someone to take care of these key IT assets in a collaborative way with you, that you're selecting an organization whose ethics, work habits, integrity, and business goals align with yours. So we'll take a look at some of those attributes that really help you maximize your choice of a good partner and minimize the risk in doing so. And what we'll leave you with at the end is a tool set to evaluate and choose the ideal service provider. We'll be providing everyone who's on the webinar today with a white paper that'll actually help you walk through the very processes we'll cover today in real time if you are in fact ready to choose or look at evaluating external service providers to help you meet your IT service needs. So let's just go through and kind of cover off from a prevailing wisdom standpoint. What are some of the benefits of having, first of all of the internal IT support done by you inside of your own corporation? And certainly some of the benefits that you'll get, I'm sure you're all very much aware of. You have full control over project management, what jobs get done, when they get done. The availability of your technicians during business hours where they're dedicated to your company, they're employees of your firm, and they are in large part on-site during those business hours. And in the event that they're not totally overwhelmed or booked solidly with IT tasks, they certainly can be assigned to other things during downtime. Maybe that's the management of some other things around the company that aren't directly related to the IT function. Some of the challenges that you might run into, and I think most of you are now, particularly with the economy the way it is we're all being asked to do more with less. So from that perspective, do the resources that you have, can they meet the business continuity needs of your business? And as you know, that is constant pressure for many of us in the IT business, whether we're in our own companies or we're working as a service provider, have the constant pressure of uptime. Does our IT infrastructure meet the 24/7 demands of our company? Are our remote employees in different time zones taken care of when the East Coast IT team has gone home for the evening? Are our West Coast employees, for instance, supported in the same manner as our East Coast employees? And can you manage the risk and exposure associated with staff turnover? On average, companies have a single dedicated IT person for about every 80 to 100 employees. So if you're a company somewhere between 75 and 125 employees or 150, you've probably got a limited amount of dedicated internal IT resource. So there is a little bit of risk there in terms of staff turnover. You've got knowledge that can leave the company if a person leaves. Even scheduling things like vacation time, jury duty becomes a bit of a tightrope to walk, because you do have to consider the exposure of business continuity when that resource is not available, particularly if it's only a single resource. So those are some of the challenges associated with just the dedicated internal IT resource, and some of the benefits as well. If we take a look at, flip the coin, so to speak, and go to external IT resources, the benefits are 24/7 support potential, right? You can contract for that. And you can have someone available 24/7 to address the needs of risk mitigation and business continuity. And you can contract for it. So you can actually have a solid contract with a vendor to make sure that your critical business infrastructure, IT infrastructure, is maintained and up and continually running. You will get some flexibility over the level of support needed, and that can be also contracted for. When do you need them? How much resource do you need? For what particular kinds of support would you require an outside organization? So you can then begin to get the flexibility of what things you can handle internally on your own versus what you'd like to outsource. And the other benefit is you do have access to seasoned and experienced resources. One of the things about outsourced IT service providers is that in order to support particular infrastructure, whether it's the Cisco routers or whether it's switches or whether it's firewalls, certifications and training is very much required of outsourced service providers in order to represent those infrastructure assets. And they are consistently and continually being updated on their training and certifications for those products, which may put them in a better position to be out in front of industry trends that internally you might be a little bit behind them on. So you might be able to take advantage of some of the skill sets and training that they're getting from their vendors. And some of the challenges that you'll run into with outsourcing some of your IT functions certainly is loss of control and your shared responsibility for the IT function as opposed to completely owning it yourself. And we'll cover some of the ways that that can occur and how you can get around it. And there also may be some cost factors too. If you take a look at a traditional outsourced IT solution, it may mean putting somebody on staff full-time. But what we'll examine today are, because of the flexibility, ways to communicate and collaborate, that you may not have to go with a full-time resource inside your company dedicated for 40 hours a week. There may be some things that you can take advantage of in terms of the economies of scale that outsourced IT service providers have put in place, where you could have a dedicated person on your account but not necessarily need that person for full-time. And then obviously the challenge, and we're going to cover some of it today, is finding and selecting the right partner. And we went over a moment ago some of the criteria that you might want to look at in terms of skill set, work ethic, that kind of thing, culture, to make sure it's the right fit for your company and your staff. So one of the things that we're going to take a look at today is how do you combine your internal staff with external IT resources to deliver the kind of business continuity, risk mitigation, and business growth that all of us are under pressure to deliver for our companies. And the way that you can do that, if we divide this up into some quadrants, is, for example, internal IT responsible for functions that maximize the use of the internal IT staff. And we'll cover some examples of that in a minute. But one of the things might be, your internal IT staff may be dedicated to large infrastructure projects that create the mechanisms and the foundation for your company to grow. Or maybe that's managing a line of business application, where you might take advantage of an external resource and make them responsible for functions that might be more cost-effectively handled externally. Let me give you an example. Maybe handling Helpdesk calls, taking care of printer email-related issues as opposed to line of business or infrastructure issues might be something that you might want to outsource. It really depends on where you are in your life cycle and what your skill sets are, and we'll cover those in a moment as well. The other thing is it gives you the ability to maximize and have some flexibility to adjust and shift work between internal and external resources. With the right infrastructure in place, you may be doing triage and tier 1 support on an issue, and then maybe you need to offload that. But putting the infrastructure in place to have that done and make sure you're getting real-time collaboration and communication from your IT service partner is really important. So one of the things that a co-managed service desk would allow you to do is to have control over your IT infrastructure and understand what's happening when you do decide to outsource some of that work. And again, control and optimize your own technology investment. Each of you, in some manner or another, has decided that in order for your company to reach its goals and to drive business growth, you've had to make a substantial investment in technology. And what a good service provider and a good service solution will provide you is real-time information about people, assets, time, and technology to have you make the best decision relative to those investments. And we're going to cover a number of those things today. So let's talk about what is a co-managed service desk. How do you work side by side with an IT service provider for functions that generally, and to this point, you probably handle all on your own? And the words we like to use are maximize efficiency and augment your internal IT capabilities, not necessarily contract them all out. And some of the things you're going to want to consider are, how do I strategically outsource a portion of our IT functions so that my teams can concentrate on what they're good at and what drives our business, and my outsourced IT service provider can deliver the rest? And it'll absolutely require a high degree of communication, good collaboration, and coordinating the efforts between you and your outsourced IT service provider. Now, there's many things in those points that you can contract for, that you can agree to, and that you can workflow. But one of the things that we're going to look at today is there a product service desk tool that can, in fact, help with the delivery of that mandate? So in other words, what's the infrastructure you're going to put in place between you and your IT service provider to make sure that you can request services, that they can react to your requests, and that you can each be on the same page at any given point in time as to what's going on with each individual IT service issue? And when we go through the key attributes of a good, solid, outsourced IT service provider and the questions and things that you should ask them and be checking for when you choose one, will be about the infrastructure that's in place at their company to help communicate with you. And we're going to go into that in a lot greater detail as we move forward in the presentation. So let's take a second here and try to evaluate, what are the IT functions that you should or could outsource? And I think that's going to vary greatly with each company. So I think what our partners have told us and our customers have always shared with us is, before we act in any way to outsource a function, we need to assess our company. And the areas that they generally assess before they decide to outsource any kind of IT-related work are, what are our current resource constraints? Do we have enough staff to do what we want to do? Are we at the point where we're reducing staff or adding staff? And how is that going to impact our ability to deliver on our IT services mandate internally? That will have a great degree to do to determine whether you can and what you ought to outsource. Taking into consideration your corporate mission, your corporate objectives, and how the delivery of IT services aligns with those is also very important. We've seen companies with business missions that don't necessarily align with having a full-blown internal IT service organization. By the same token, we've seen companies with missions and objectives where the IT infrastructure and team is absolutely critical to the long-term success of the company. So again, you have to understand your corporate mission and the objectives and where your IT teams, departments, and philosophies and methodologies fit with that. Technical skills become really, really important. If you have assets, whether it's line of business applications, whether it's IT infrastructure that's critical to your business, if you're going to do that internally, it's obviously clear you're going to need the skill sets technically to achieve that. So taking an inventory of your staff, their training, their expertise, and then understanding how that relates to your mission is really critical. Industry, basically, if you're in the medical industry, IT becomes very important when you start to think about electronic medical records. Or if you're in manufacturing and an ERP system is particularly important to you. Sometimes the industry that you're in is going to determine what exactly you need to support internally versus what you can outsource. So again, what are you seeing in your industry trends? What are your peers doing? Having those kinds of discussions with peers that are non-competitive but are in the same industry to determine how they're doing things can go a long way to determining how you want to attack that problem. Again, taking a look at your own business practices internally. How is your company organized? What is your company capable of? What are your management team philosophies? All those things have a lot of impact on how you want to handle your IT infrastructure and support. And then also what phase you are in the growth stage of your company. Are you in rapid growth mode? Do you have the time and the ability to staff up to meet that growth? Or would you potentially consider outsourcing to offset some of that growth until at which point you can hire and train staff to keep up with the infrastructure? So whether you're a fast-growing company, whether you're in a steady state, or whether your business is declining, taking a look at your profitability and those kinds of things is going to have a big impact on how you decide to handle your IT infrastructure. Okay. So when we get down to the next phase, which is, okay, what IT functions should you outsource? And, there's a couple of different ways that you could assess this. The first of which certainly is to assess what things are you already handling. Are you handling the phones? Are you handling the network? Are you handling software applications? Are you handling security? Kind of make a list of things that you're already handling. What most of our customers then decide to do is, okay, which of those things align with our business strategy and the resources and constraints that we have within our own team to support them? And then align them with which are within the core competencies of your IT organization. If you find yourself struggling to support, whether it's a line of business application or a certain network infrastructure asset, it may mean that you either need to get more training on that or a certification for your IT staff, or that may be something that based on the cost to get people trained or hire people that are certified in those areas to deliver the kind of competence that you need, you may be able to do it more cost effectively externally. So those are some of the things to consider. Make a list, how they align with your business strategy, compare them with your competencies, and then decide which things could we outsource. Let me give you an example. Consider you're a medical office. Your internal IT staff may need to maintain, upgrade, and repair core patient care systems and equipment. That's the absolute core function to a medical office, which is delivering care to patients. And to the extent that the IT assets for that medical practice are supported internally, you're probably going to want an asset inside the company, in the building, every day while the office is open to support those systems. Where if you take the computers, servers, desktops, network, firewalls, wireless routers, whatever it happens to be, to support that application, that might be something that you can outsource. So an internal person that knows the line of business application and an external partner that can help maintain the systems that support that software. That's just one example. Another one might be if you're in the manufacturing sector, this could be an ERP system that you might want to maintain internally. But again, the servers and desktops, laptops, phones, et cetera, that support that, you might want to use an external partner. And you can certainly pick and choose which ones are the right ones based on your own core business capabilities. So once you determine the kinds of support and services that you might want to take advantage of an external service provider for, now you're coming to the point where I have to pick one. And obviously there's many out there. They come in a variety of shapes and sizes. They come from the one-person consulting person who left a large company and has really good IT experience and wants to come help your business to companies with hundreds of employees dedicated to IT support that support the products that you have in your building, that have certified technicians, and every flavor of company and IT support organization that you can imagine between them also exists. So how do you go about deciding who to pick? So what we'll spend the next couple of minutes going over is what are some of the key attributes that we've found in the industry that are attributes that a good, solid IT service provider ought to have. And then the questions and the probing that you can do to determine that they do in fact have the skill set that they profess to have, and ways for you to kind of vet out whether or not they can deliver on your IT needs. So let's take a look at what we believe is certainly a key attribute: competence, range of expertise, and availability. This really gets down to and competence, like can they deliver on what they promise? Their range of expertise, what are they trained in? What are they certified for? And availability, how big is their staff? Are they fully utilized? What's their availability to help you in a pinch? So to determine their depth of technical expertise, some of the things you're going to want to find out: what training have they had? What certifications do they have to work on your systems? If you have Cisco servers and routers, you're going to want to make sure that your IT service provider has Cisco CCNEs on staff to maintain that equipment. Right? How fully utilized is their technical team? If they have 100 customers and 40 resources and they're all fully utilized, how are they going to help you? Do they have the resources available right now, or the ability to get those resources that are fully trained and certified to deliver the services that you're going to require? And again, do they have the bandwidth to continue to serve you as you grow? So those are some of the things from a competence, range of expertise, and availability standpoint that you're probably going to want to dig into pretty deeply. Flexibility and collaboration. And the reason why we want to bring this up is when supplementing your internal teams, the critical functions and collaboration on big projects, you're going to need to know how easy is it for me to assign work to them. Is there a communications vehicle in place where can I log into a portal? Can I select the issue that I have? Can I send it to you in an efficient way? And can you get back to me within a certain amount of time to let me know you can handle the work or not? If, in fact, you do decide to contract that function out, is there an ability for you to track the progress? Right? If you're working with an outsourced IT service provider, they should have systems in place where you, as an internal director of IT, CIO, manager of IT, or just a manager of a business, ought to be able to check in real time and see what's happening with each individual issue that partner is working on for you. That's without having to pick up the phone. That's without having to send an email. There ought to be a way for him to share the information that he's doing for you, the work that he's doing for you, in a portal that you can log into at any point in time from anywhere and get the information that you need. The other thing is, how can your partner in IT support track compliance with the terms of your service level agreement? If you have a certain kind of issue and you've contracted for a 4-hour response time on a certain issue, or a 2-hour response time, or a 30-minute response time, can your service provider provide you the data that says, based on these issues that were supplied at this point in time, here's how my team responded, and here's how we remediated your issue? What was our mean time to resolution? How long did it take us to first respond? when did the ticket get closed, and when were your systems back up and running. Good, solid IT service providers that you outsource a portion of your work to should be able to give you this as a function of the tools that they're using in their own business to run a better, more efficient IT organization. This is really critical that when you use an outsourced IT service provider, that the communication and collaboration between your two companies is optimal. Notification and accessibility. This is about the ability for an external IT service provider to give you the additional capacity you need when your IT staff is overwhelmed. This is something that, based on some external IT support organizations, they have people on staff because of the economies of scale that they can bring to multiple customers and the systems that they use, that they have staff available when you need them. And again, it gets down to, ask the question, how can you notify them when you need immediate help? The other things that you're going to want to investigate here are, is this something that you can do without a contract in place? In other words, can you on an ad hoc basis give them a phone call and see if they can provide some support to you? They probably can, and it's probably on a time and materials basis. And from your perspective, that's likely to be an unbudgeted expense. The other way to do this is when it is contracted, and you have someone either on retainer or you've bought a block of hours, and they've got you under contract at a certain rate. So there's no surprises to you when you're going to, in terms of cost, when you're going to contract with an outsourced IT service provider. And they have good mechanisms in place to let you know how many hours on a block hour contract you have remaining. When is it time to renew? Okay, how much of your retainer have you used versus not used? So good IT service providers have, again, software in place that tracks all that information, and they should be able to give you a report on that very easily. The other thing to ask is, do they have their own extended network of service providers that they can call upon in the event that you have a significant increase in work that you need to give them? If you've lost an employee and you're about to heap another 40 to 50 hours of work a week on an external service provider, you may have the right service provider in terms of certifications and qualifications and work ethic, but you might put an awful strain on their organization to find somebody dedicated for another 40 hours a week. So what you want to understand here is, what's their virtual network look like? Most really solid IT service providers have a network of people that they can call upon in a moment's notice that have the right work ethic, the right certifications, and the right skill sets to address the products that they service and support. In the event that they get a big increase in work, they're able to reach out to that network so that they can provide you a level of service that's commensurate with or better than the service that they're already providing you. That also gives your outsourced IT service provider the ability to grow with you. So while they can use their extended network of service providers to handle your work in a pinch, they can also determine when their business is growing to bring on more full-time employees to support your needs. So again, these are some really important questions that you want to ask your outsourced IT service provider. Okay. What does ongoing communication look like? If you're going to co-source your IT out to an external IT service provider, seamless communication and automation of workflow is absolutely critical. And some of the things that you're going to want to look for are, do you have real-time two-way communication? Can you submit an issue and make sure you know when they accept it? When they accept it and do work, are you being communicated to and told what the status of your issue is? When you have a question, how do you communicate that to your IT service provider? Can you do it right within the same system, or do you have to jump through hoops to get answers? So some of the things that you're going to want to look for. Again, a good IT service provider is going to be using a system internally that they can extend to you to improve the communication between your employees and the service people in his organization that are working on your issues. And they ought to be able to provide that to you in a portal without any investment on your part in significant infrastructure or license fees or upfront money or anything like that. You ought to be able to get that information effectively, efficiently, and without a heck of a lot of expense. Right? And then, critically, ask the question, what happens when one of my employees submits a service issue? Right? Your service provider and you ought to be able to sit down and have a very succinct and direct conversation about what happens when somebody reports an issue. Now it's pretty easy. When it's under your control completely, they're going to call the help desk. They're going to send you an email. They might submit a ticket in the system that you already have. And then your team is going to react according to the policies that you put in place. So what you're going to want to do is, I don't know whether it's on a whiteboard or whether it's on a notepad or whether it's collaboratively in a meeting, but you're going to want to outline the workflow for tickets that are handled internally, how they get passed to your outsourced IT service provider, and what the expectations are for making sure the communication and collaboration is continual throughout the process. And again, make sure that you do that from the inception of an employee creating a ticket through the remediation and closure and communication of that issue upon closure. Okay. Number 5, key attribute, resource allocation. This is the ability to create workflows to automatically assign work to the right resources. Let me give you an example. When we looked at the medical practice before, and we said that line of business applications relative to keeping medical systems up and running, keeping patient care systems up and running, running the electronics record management inside the doctor's office ought to stay internally. And then you've determined that the external IT support organization might handle infrastructure, desktops, phones, etc. Is there a system in place that knows when a certain request is put in where it goes? Is there a workflow that automates internal IT staff gets patient care, external IT staff gets can't log into Exchange? Right? How can you route that? Again, the systems ought to be able to automatically distinguish between those issues and assign them accordingly. And then a workflow ought to be in place that you can see all the work that's being done by the IT service provider, and you can also see the work time, date stamped by the individual within your own company that's doing the work. So just make sure that those things can happen automatically, because it'll take a lot of effort, time, and wasted cycles off your plate and get your systems back up and running more quickly if that's the case. Escalation. You've got an issue with your IT service provider. You've forwarded it off. You've got a service level agreement that says that particular issue is going to be addressed in a certain amount of time. Okay, how do you know whether or not that's been met or not? So what you're going to want to understand from your IT service provider is, do they have a system in place or a process that can identify when you do and when they don't meet critical thresholds or deadlines? And then what happens if they don't? If a critical issue isn't resolved within the time frame we agreed upon, what happens? Most good, solid IT service providers will have a contract in place for you that basically says this kind of issue will be responded to in X amount of time, and if it's not, there is some consideration in your contract for not meeting that service level agreement. So again, understanding in that context, how do issues get escalated, and then how do you track the progress? And one of the ways that you're going to be able to do that is with tracking and reporting. Any good IT service provider that's using a system to run their business ought to be able to give you reports on a regular basis as to what exactly is happening within your business. This is in addition to any real-time availability of information that you'll have in any shared portal that you might be using to track service issues. And here's what you'll notice with companies that are really proactively managing your business, your IT infrastructure. The conversations that you'll have with good IT service providers are about how to build and move your business forward. They're not always going to be necessarily around what happened with the printer on the 4th floor last Wednesday when we put the call in. When good IT service providers are collaborating well with their customers, most of that stuff is happening behind the scenes. If a print server needs to be rebooted, if an Exchange server needs to be rebooted so that everybody gets their email when they come in to work on Monday morning and people aren't sitting around wondering why they can't get to their calendars. That's the kind of thing that a good IT service provider will remediate for you remotely before anybody gets into work, and then he'll give you a report on exactly what he was able to remediate and how your business continuity was maintained. And you'll see a switch in the kinds of meetings you're having with those kinds of service providers away from how did we manage a specific incident and more toward your company is growing, what are the infrastructure requirements, how can we as a good outsourced IT service provider give you the insight, detail, and processes to make sure we build out your infrastructure to meet your business needs. And I think that's one of the first things you're going to see from a good outsourced IT service provider. You should be able to have monthly meetings, quarterly business reviews. The detail in those meetings should be down to charts, graphs, really visual reports that will give you an understanding of where your IT infrastructure is and how your service provider is helping you and why your employees are more efficient. And companies like Terakai are well suited to provide you with that information. So before we get to the Q&A part of our presentation, when evaluating external IT service providers, some of the things that you'll be able to understand as you come out of the evaluation process off of those key attributes is fundamentally knowing whether or not they can effectively co-manage IT service issues with your internal staff. Right? Can they collaborate? Can they work side by side? Are they the right services augmentation partner for you? Do they know what they're doing? Are they trained? Are they certified? Can they support the infrastructure that you have in place? Do they keep their promises? I mean, that's something that you'll need to evaluate right out of the gate. That's relative to service level agreements. That's relative to promptness. That's relative to the skills to solve the problems that you have. And you'll be able to see that right away, and that's something that you ought to be monitoring very closely early on. And then will they bill you fairly? Most good companies, like Terakai, are very upfront with what their fees are, when you're charged, how you're charged, when your bill is sent out, a resolution process, and a really clear and fair contracts. And it should be no mystery to you when you receive a bill from your IT service provider exactly what you were billed for and the benefits that added to your company, and good companies like Terakai will deliver that to you. The other thing that we would suggest based on industry trends is that the services that can be delivered to you from an external IT service provider, if you're going to go in a collaborative environment, is that they ought to be able to share a portion of the service desk tool that they use with you. You shouldn't have to go out and buy your own. You shouldn't have to invest in a lot of infrastructure. And you ought to be able to access it as a software as a service via a web browser. Take advantage of cloud computing and the infrastructure that's in the cloud for you to take advantage of so you don't have to invest in more yourself. And you ought to be able to take care of it that way without a lot of investment. You ought to get significant benefit without a tremendous amount of upfront investment so that you can determine if it's cost-effective for you without having a large upfront sum that you'll have to pay to get involved. And then what you can start to evaluate over that period of time is not whether or not you've spent the right money on the software to manage your IT business, but whether or not your IT service provider is delivering the kind of productivity to your company that you've contracted for. Graham, I think that's about it for the formal part. If we wanted to go to Q&A, we can.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Jake.
You bet.
All right. Our first question is from Kevin, and he wants to know, when is a good time to evaluate co-sourcing some IT support functions?
Well, I think as we looked at that, the chart that was how do you assess your own company, I think there's what we have seen from our clients, in particular as they work with their end users, is that there are certainly inflection points in a business when it's time to evaluate whether or not you want to outsource or co-source some IT functions. It may have to do with, if it's economic, it may have to do with growth. If you're adding 50 employees in a remote location and you need to provide IT support, is that a point in time where you need some outside help or you can handle on your own? Is it a point in time when you might be reducing staff, reducing costs within an organization? And then it's about understanding, can your staff be maintained with the budget that you've been given, et cetera. So I think whenever you have an inflection point in your business, whether you're doing yearly business planning, whether you're doing a quarterly review, whether you've got some significant changes happening in your business, or the opportunity just looks like the technology's gotten to the point, there's a service provider that you're talking to that you believe you can trust and work with, that just create that kind of inflection point where it might be time to evaluate it.
All right. Kelly would like to know, is it necessary to have an external IT resource on site?
Well, that's an important question. Here's not any longer. I think what we've seen is that the technology and infrastructure that IT service providers have available to them now to support small, medium, and even enterprise-level businesses allows them to have reach into your IT organization remotely. And as such, you'll, as an internal IT organization, you'll be able to take advantage of those economies of scale. That, for instance, putting one dedicated person on staff to augment your teams may limit you to the skill set that one particular person has or their availability. Whereas if you're taking advantage of the entire skill set and resources of a good outsourced IT service provider, you're going to get more skill, you're going to get more availability, and in all likelihood, probably a lower price point. So the short answer is no, it does not. It doesn't really require they be on site unless it's a function that you absolutely don't ever consider having managed outside your building.
Okay. All right, and we got another one here. This is from Rick. What certifications should an ideal service provider have?
Well, again, that's going to vary customer to customer. The certifications that an IT service provider ought to have for any individual company really should have to do with the IT assets that are in place at the organization or that plan to be in place. Obviously, if you're dependent upon Cisco routers and servers or Dell servers, you're going to want a service provider that has the certifications and training to support those specific assets. If you're using a partner to help support line of business applications, they ought to be a consultant, service provider, trainer for that particular product. So the certifications and training that they'll require, that you should require them to have, should align with the assets that you have and the business goals that you want to execute.
All right. Well, Jake, that looks like it wraps up the Q&A session, and I just want to thank you for joining us today, and I'd also like to thank everyone else for their participation. I hope this webinar has met your expectations. Terakai will be hosting these webinars regularly. Again, thank you for joining us, and have a great afternoon.